Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali A. Rizvi, and with me is Armin Navabi. Armin Navabi, on a scale of 1 to 10, how triggered are you feeling today?
Triggered for what?
Anything. I'm not going to tell you what you're triggered by. It's your own truth.
0. But triggered people don't admit that they're triggered. So what's the point of even asking?
Well, if you're that stoic, then there's nothing else to blame but toxic masculinity. Anyway, yeah. So Armin and I are here, and so yeah, we're. This is something that we've been doing for a while. So those of you who've been following us, you know that we have a 3-part series underway on the differences between the Sunni and the Shia. All three of them work as a standalone. So if you haven't heard the first 2 parts, that's fine. You can still take part in this. But if you do want to check it out, the links are in the description here. Part 1, we talked about the history of the Shias and Sunnis and how both of these sects of Muslims evolved and developed and how they were born. And in part 2, we talked about the theological differences and the differences in their beliefs. And we actually got a lot of amazing feedback on both of them. So I think people really, really enjoyed those 2. So now we're going to actually dive into...
And also a lot of Muslims that told us that we have no right talking about these things because we're not Muslim.
Right. Because we have to believe. To which I answered, I'm like, are you only going to get somebody to talk about Greek mythology who actually literally believes that Zeus and Hera lived on Mount Olympus?
Right.
No, you won't. You'd likely not get a good account from them. So we are the perfect people to hear about this. In fact, I would venture to say that we are probably the leading authorities in the world on this topic.
Okay, you're going to make a lot of people angry with that.
That's the whole point. That's Sunnah, right? I mean, Muhammad made a lot of people angry too. Right. I'm being facetious.
Okay.
Or am I? Anyway, so we have this 3-part series, and what we're going to do today is we're going to get into the politics of it. There is so much to talk about, so I know that we have a limited amount of time. We don't want to lose you guys' attention, so I think what we're going to focus on mostly today is the proxy war. You have the center of the Sunni thing in Saudi Arabia, and you have the center of Shia power, theological power, let's say, a theological political power for the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia, theological political power for Shia is in Iran currently, and there's a proxy war, and everybody's kind of involved in it. It's a big mess.
But let's give some context before we get into the modern era. Like, how do we get Iran to become the center of Shia Islam, which a lot of Shias outside of Iran would hate that we're saying that, right? There are some Shias outside of Iran that think Iran is like Shia paradise. A lot of Shias outside of Iran that think like, no, fuck Iran. It doesn't represent Shia Islam, right? And a lot of many Sunnis outside of Saudi Arabia, actually more Sunnis outside of Saudi Arabia that don't think Saudi Arabia represents Sunni Islam.
I was going to say, yeah.
But at the same time, when it comes to political power, Saudi Arabia is the center of Sunni Islam.
This is interesting. So I want to actually qualify that a little bit more. That's a really good point. Now, with Iran, the thing is that, what you said, yes, I'm sure that there's some Shias who reject Iran, but most Shias around the world, especially I know in the Indian subcontinent, in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, and these people, they really look up to Iran as a center of Shia spiritual authority. And in contrast, most Muslims hate Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
They hate them. Most Sunnis, Shias, everybody, even the Sunnis, they feel like Saudi Arabia has misrepresented them because Saudi Arabia is in love with America. They're greedy for oil. They're completely their monarchy is full of like this material greed, all kinds of shit. So they just don't like Saudi Arabia. Even Muslim imams, even Muslim politicians like Ilhan Omar, they are constantly railing against Saudi Arabia.
So Iran has done a better job at PR among Shias than Saudi Arabia has done among Sunnis. There are a lot more Shia imams that are loyal to Iran than Sunni clerics that are loyal to Saudi Arabia. However, there are, like, even though the percentage is higher, there are many Shia imams that don't like Iran's government. Like Shirazi Shia imams, for example, are anti-Iran's government.
Yeah.
But
a lot of the ones that in Iraq don't like the Shia.
And a lot of it is politics, power, competition. But overall, Iran's government has more influence among Shias worldwide than any Sunni authority. You could argue that there is really no Sunni authority. Iran's, like Khamenei, for example, is a huge religious leader with a significant influence around the world. Again, not every Shia believes that he is like a holy figure that needs to be followed, but the number is significant. There are millions of people outside of Iran that are willing to die for him.
Right. Yeah. So the thing is that when we talk about how popular they are among the Shia sect or the Sunni sect, depending on whether you're Iran or Saudi Arabia, that is a completely separate issue from how much political influence and ideological influence they have. So Saudi Arabia, for instance, most Sunni people don't like Saudi Arabia. They feel like it misrepresents them. They don't like the image of Saudi Arabia around the world. It makes Islam look bad, Muslims look bad, all that. But the Saudi theological influence, the Salafist influence, and the Wahhabi influence around the world has been actually much more powerful.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just put some context, right? Why did Iran become Shia? Because Iran was Sunni for most of the Islamic history, right? Just really quickly, the Shia ideology Shia mythology is great for rebellion. It's just like we talked about in the previous 2 episodes about this. We kept on talking about Hussein and his martyrdom. And we mentioned that in this episode, we're going to see how it's used over and over again, right? The fact that if you go back and listen to some of the stories that we mentioned, you see that throughout the history between Shias and Sunnis were in power. Shias seemed to be the ones that were being oppressed, wrong. That led to a lot of stories, not just Hussein stories, many Shia Imam stories that Shias keep repeating, keep remembering about how Sunnis oppressed them, wronged them, they killed their leaders, but especially Hussein above all else. Hussein's death, and second to that is also Ali's death and Fatima's death, are constantly mentioned to Shias to show you how the powers that be are against you, and how just like Hussein rebelled against the authorities, we need to rebel against our authorities. And the fact that, the way that it works is genius, even though nobody is intending it to be genius. It's just how the meme works, right? You don't have to convince people to go rebel. You just have to first spread the stories and just make people emotionally attached to these stories. And then when you need them to rebel, then you just play with those stories, with those mythology, and it just fits so perfectly. And you could see the Hussein story was used since the Safavid Empire, right, that came and made Iran Shia. Those stories were used, right? And the reason Iran became Shia, right? Iran was invaded by Arabs, and Iran became Islamic. But the Iranian people, and I'm not saying this this is not patriotism. Like, I'm from Iran, okay, but I know a lot of Iranian nationalists love to say this. This part is true. There's a lot of parts that they exaggerate, but this part of it is true. The Iranian people always saw themselves separate from the Arabs. They wanted to keep their national identity. They wanted to see themselves as different from the Arabs that invaded them. And when the Safavid Empire came, the Shia ideology was a perfect opportunity to have a separate identity. Throughout the Islamic history, Shia stories, because the people in power, the people that ruled over different nations invaded by Arabs, were Sunni. The Shia sect was the perfect tool to use to get people to rebel, like take Islam, but rebel against their religious leaders. It was always the perfect tool for people to get people to rebel against the religious authorities at the time. And Iran, it was first the Egyptians that were the first Shia empire, but then Iran took it and ran with it and became Shia after the Safavids. And they went back a little bit Sunni again after that, but then they went back.
Can you talk about the empire?
What, the Safavid Empire?
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's very interesting because every time somebody comes and says, like, hey, we're Shia now instead of Sunni, they always claim that they're the Mahdi, right? Even with Khomeini, we saw that a little bit. But the leader, the founder of the Safavid Empire also said that. They all have to claim, the Shias are obsessed over bloodline, right? The Sunnis are like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're an obsession over bloodline. We brought Islam so that we don't have to think like monarchs anymore, right? But the Shias always have to find a direct line between the ruler and Muhammad to show that, because the whole point of the Imams being the leaders instead of the Khalifa was because they were from Muhammad's family. So,
right, and for those of you who actually follow who have heard the second part of this, we talked about the importance of the Ahl al-Bayt, which is the family and the house of Muhammad, the Prophet. So, because of that, because there's so much reverence accorded to the Ahl al-Bayt, the family of the Prophet, there is a lot of importance accorded to the bloodline.
Right.
The fact that anybody who's descended from them. So even today in Iran, the leader has to be a demonstrated descendant of Muhammad and have a direct bloodline.
The Safavids were Sufi to begin with. That's why they were called the Safavids, right? But they also had an obsession over Ali, and Ali, as their leader. And then eventually that obsession over Ali made them become hardcore Shias, and that's why there's always this love-hate relationship between Shias and Sufis, right? Because they took a lot of their Sufi love for Ali as very similar to worship. They don't call it worship, but it's very similar to worship, and that's why Shia Islam has took a lot of things from the Sufis, but still, right? Anyways, they call it Irfan instead of Sufism, by the way, in Iran. So that just gives you some context. By the way, Saudi Arabia looking at Saudi Arabia and why it became what it is today, we have to understand that Saudi Arabia was not the place where Saudi Arabia is today was not very important for a very long time, right? Saudi Arabia is a very, very new country. Like Iran is an ancient used to be, like, the identity of being Iranian is an ancient thing. Saudi Arabia is not even 100 years old as a country, right? And ever since the Arabs became an empire, nobody put their capital in Mecca or Medina. Like, that was the least important, even though that was the place where they had to go for Hajj, to Kaaba. It was in the middle of fucking nowhere. Like, there was no capital there. There was no political advantage to be there. Only recently it became a big deal because of all the oil there, right? In fact, we know based on the recent episode we had with Tom Holland that's the fact that the city Mecca. I mean, that's another conversation. But it was never an important place, even though it was the center. Everybody pointed there to worship. It was never a huge political interest for anybody to take over that land.
Mm-hmm. And we will, like, I will get into a little bit later how when Saudi Arabia became politically influential and a big economic
it was the oil. And even after the discovery of the oil, it was still not that important because oil wasn't that expensive. It was after World War II and switching from coal to oil that all of a sudden oil became very, very...
It was really after when it became really, really rocketed. So the 1970s were a pivotal decade for the Shia-Sunni conflict and for just general Islamic political power in the world. Okay, so in 1970s, one of the things that happened was in 1973, you had one of the wars between the Arabs and the Israelis, right? So in that 1973 war, there was a boycott, right? The Arabs, there was an Arab oil boycott of the U.S. and the Netherlands, and Saudi Arabia had joined it because it was a member of OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And then it was after the war that the oil prices actually exploded and went up really high. So Saudi Arabia got a lot of its oil wealth and became a massive power. It started like in the 60s or something with the formation of Aramco when the US moved in to start helping them get the oil out and start using it and selling it. Right. But really after 1973 is when Saudi Arabia became massive. And that's also when they helped with a lot of the funding along with Pakistan. Right. To the Afghan war, which is the Soviet-Afghan war, which we'll also get into in a bit.
And at that time, before the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, Saudi Arabia and Iran had a good relationship, right?
Yeah.
They were both proxies and puppets, basically, of the United States. Like, United States had three major players in the Middle East under its control. Right, it was Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. All three were U.S. allies, and because of that, U.S. had almost full control over certain commodity at that time. Right, I mean, ever since, you couldn't have been any better for United States until 1979. And the Islamic Revolution happened. I mean, a little bit before it, because the Shah in Iran all of a sudden was playing a little bit, hard to get with the United States with the oil. So the powers that be decided that, the Islamic Revolution was supported by Western power, which is a lot of people don't know this, right? Because the Shah was acting a little bit, playing with nationalizing oil and all that stuff, right? So making it independent. But then I think obviously they all regret what they did right now, because now they have no control over Iran anymore, right? So you said 1973, but 1979, when the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran, that is, I think, the most important thing that happened ever since, which put the tension between, ever since then, the tensions between Sunnis and Shias have been on steroids, right?
Well, it became bilateral. Yeah, it became, so there was, at first it was like unipolar, where, Saudi Arabia was really the central economic power in the Arab world and the Muslim world. Generally, it was all Saudi Arabia. And then after that, when in 1979, in terms of at least political influence, right, Iran became a massive sort of threat in a way. And that started the proxy war. And there's another thing that happened in 1979 that scared the shit out of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, but that was because of the revolution.
No, not just the Wahhabis. There was in 1979. So the king, who was the king at that time? Was it King Khalid? Yes, it was King Khalid, right? So there were two things that happened around in 1979. One was the Iranian Revolution.
Right.
Okay, so now there was this massive Shia powerhouse that was in the region, which really
well, it wasn't powerful yet, but because it was it was broke. But we'll say how it became powerful. But
we're going to talk about it. But they didn't care. They had American hostages. They were openly confronting everybody else. And then the second thing was the Masjid of Mecca, the Grand Mosque, was sieged. Right,
but that was because of the Islamic Revolution in Iran.
Well, they believed that the Mahdi came back, right? So
no, well, before that happened, right? So you have to understand, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was a huge source of inspirations for Muslims all around the world. The Muslims around the world were having a crisis of identity. Okay, ever since World War I, there were no caliphs anymore. So the last Khalifa that ever ruled, this was to not have a Khalifa in the Islamic world is historically in the Islamic world unheard of, right? You always had a Khalifa for the Sunnis. And then after World War I, when Ataturk came and all of a sudden Muslims were like, what the fuck is happening to us? We don't even have a Khalifa anymore, right? And ever since then, the Islamic world went down, became more, compared to the rest of the world, they looked very backwards, right? They looked like they had this history of being an empire, taking over the world, having the House of Wisdom, having the golden age of Arabs and all that stuff, always being in power. God is on our side, that's why we're winning. And now non-Muslims look like they are dominating the world. The non-Muslims look like they have all the knowledge, all the power, all the resources, and they're just being used like pawns, and they can't even control their own destiny, and they have, and they're like weak. And you have to understand that, again, we mentioned this last time, I'll mention it again. Again, in the Sunni mindset, it used to be that God is on our side, that's why we're winning. Technically, it's the other way around. Because they were constantly winning, they had to come up with an explanation. So they always understood. Their understanding is like God is always on the side of the victor, and that's the reason why we're winning, right? So, because they come up with an explanation for why they're winning so fast and taking over so fast. But the Shia's mentality, because they were always wrong, because all their leaders were always being killed, poisoned, beheaded, and they would never get to be in power, they built their understanding, their theology, that God is on the side of the oppressed. We know, so the Sunnis are like, we know we're on God's side because we're winning. Shias were like, we know we're on God's side because we are the oppressed. We are the ones that are being wronged, right? So that was their identity. But when Sunnis all of a sudden lost their Khalifa, so does that mean that God is not on your side anymore? So this is caused a crisis of identity because they don't have a Khalifa anymore, right? But then fast forward to 1979 when Shias all of a sudden win the Islamic Revolution, and now they're making a government. Their understanding was like, we can't be in power because we're the oppressed, right? Like that's supposed to be in their theology, that we can't be in power unless the Mahdi comes back. And this is why historically before, every time that somebody wants to be in power as a Shia, they had to say like, well, I'm the Mahdi. But Khomeini tried to play with that, but I think it wouldn't sell. So they came up with a new excuse. They changed the ideology and they built the idea of Velayat Faqih. Like this is why they call it Khomeinism. It's a new version of Shiism, which some Shias really hate, because some Shias think that we cannot have a government, we cannot have a Shia government until the Mahdi comes back. Iran is doing it wrong. But Khomeini came and said, no, you got it all wrong for 1400 years. We have to hold a government for the Mahdi until he comes back. We are his representatives until he comes back. And that's,
that what, so Velayat al-Faqih, right?
Yes.
Which is a sort of a central element in the authority in Iran.
Yes.
Is that exactly what it means? It means a holder of the government until
it means the jurist. So Velayat Faqih is like the jurist. Let me see what the actual translation would be in English. Velayat Faqih. So Velayat is like Vali, right? Mm-hmm. So means like the leadership of the jurist, I think. The guardianship of the Islamic jurists. That's the translation.
Okay.
So if Velayat is like the plural, I think, of Vali. Is that right? So that's like the guardianship of the Islamic jurists. So basically, Khomeini argued in his books and his sermons and his writings that it should be the Islamic jurists that run the government. That's the only. I don't know how he justified it, given that for so many years that was. But he said like the only logical sense. In fact, he changed his. We have writings of him saying before the Islamic Revolution, accepting the role of the Shah, which is so contradictory, like to what most people know of.
The Shah was a U.S. friendly secular dictator that ruled Iran. No, because before Khomeini, like you have to understand, what Khomeini did to Iran was like a huge crisis of identity for Iranians as well. Because for 7,000 years, Iran had a Shah, had a king, had a monarch. And then Khomeini comes and after I'm not talking 700, okay? I'm talking 7,000 years, okay? This was the first time where Iran didn't have a Shah, okay? So even during the Shia... Well, Mossadegh in 1953.
No, but the Shah was out... No, but the Shah was still outside. Like, he wasn't dead. He was just not in Iran for a while, and then he came back, even during Mossadegh. Right? You're muted.
Yeah, keep going.
So yeah, but even during the Shia, when the Shia imams, when we had Shah, they were like, yeah, we need a Shah because the imams cannot be in the government, and we need the Shah to protect, just like the mullahs in Sunni countries said that we need the Khalifa to protect us and create an environment where Islam could. We could teach Islam. The Shias but at least the Khalifa was an Islamic thing, right? The Shah wasn't. So the mullahs never claimed that they should be in power until Khomeini came, and he won. So you're like, okay, shit, we're in power, so we need an excuse for being in power, and he created that excuse. A lot of Shia leaders in Iran didn't like that, okay, and a lot of them were killed by Khomeini's, loyalists. So this is revolutionary even in the Shia world. That's why some people call it Khomeinism, right? But now Khomeinism is a very popular part of Shia Islam. Like, it's not like a lot of people agree with that. But the reason why I'm saying that what happened in Saudi Arabia was a result of what happened in Iran is because originally when Khomeini came, he didn't sell it as a Shia uprising. He sold it as an Islamic uprising, right? Even though he had anti-Sunni writings before the Islamic Revolution in Iran, he completely ignored that. And he called for unity among Muslims. And because Sunnis around the world, Muslims around the world in general, were thinking that United Kingdom and United States, these superpowers that just moving us around like chess pieces, and we have no control, and we are not in power anymore. To have a Khomeini come and remove one of the chess pieces of United States, which was the Shah, to come and topple a government that was a U.S. ally, and say fuck you to the United States and win and stay in power, that eventually they considered him a Shia, but originally Muslims all around the world saw that as a source of inspiration. That, wow, finally we see somebody could say, push back against the United States and win. And this is like Islam versus the West, Islam versus Kufr and the infidels, and a victory in any sense. It didn't matter that they were Shia. It was a victory, and they were supporting Khomeini, right? But then eventually and Khomeini himself never saw this as an Iranian revolution, okay? Eventually it was rebranded as an Iranian revolution, but Khomeini was an anti-nationalist. Khomeini hated the concept of Iran. Khomeini only saw Islam, mostly Shia Islam, okay? And, hidden Shia, but it was about an Islamic revolution, not an Iranian revolution, and he did not think this revolution is supposed to end at the borders of Iran. This was a revolution that was supposed to be passing Iran's border, especially going into Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and everywhere else. It's called exporting the revolution. And this is but this was actually also strategically, it was also a huge thing in terms of extending Iran's regional influence, right? Because there has historically been a Persian and Arab rivalry, right? They've always been at war. There's been an ethnic element to the Persian-Arab conflict. Now, the thing is, you can't take Arabs and you can't turn them into Persians, but you can turn them into Shias. Right.
Right?
Well, I mean, so this is so there's three different things happening here, and that's
the thing.
It's a Shia versus Sunni, and where the lines are drawn are a little bit blurry, but the Venn diagram is very close, even though it's not exact. So it's Shia versus Sunni, and then Arab versus Persian, and Iranian versus non-Iranian. So it's ethnic, religious, and nationalism, right? All of them. And the great thing about the advantage that the Iranian government has is that it could play with all of these three depending on who the audience is, right?
Yeah, that's like the Theodore Herzl. They learned a lot from him as well. It was very, very similar. It's the same kind of crossroads between ethnic and nationalist and religious, all three of them.
So you could tell some people, oh, fuck the Arabs, we're Iranians, right? But then if you go to Shia Arabs, they're like, no, fuck the Sunnis, not the Arabs, right? Fuck the Sunnis, we're all Shia brothers, right? But then if you're talking to the Iranians' national sentiments, you're like, oh, fuck these foreigners, we're Iranians. So depending on your audience, like,
you could mold your message.
Right, but the core is the same, because the core is the same.
Demagogue's wet dream.
Yes, but the core is the same because most Iranians are Shia, and most Iranians are Persian, right? So the core is the all three of them align. Even though it keeps moving around a little bit, the core is the same. But the reason why in 1979 we had an uprising in Saudi Arabia as well, which was the same year. They never told us this in Iran. They never told us this in Iran. It was wiped away from our history books. Because the Saudis were inspired by the Iranian Revolution, and the Saudi regime was terrified by the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Because what was Khomeini's message? Khomeini's message was that this is a movement against monarchy and against United States puppets in the region. And what was the Saudi regime? They were monarchs. And there were United States puppets in the regime.
And they weren't very religious. That's another thing.
Right.
They were known for their material excesses and their sort of dismissal of Islamic religiosity.
They were so similar to the Shah of Iran, right? And this is where Hussein's story keep coming in, right? Because Saudi Arabia is a Sunni regime ruling over minority Shias, right? Minority Shias in Saudi Arabia are exactly where most of the oil in Saudi Arabia is, right?
The eastern part of Saudi Arabia, where Al Khobar and Dhahran and Dammam are like those triplet cities. That's also where Aramco is set up, and that's where all the oil comes from. Yeah.
So Iran had its propaganda blasted on radio in Arabic for the Saudi consumption, right? And this is what pissed off Saudi regime. Iran started broadcasting to people in Saudi Arabia to rise up against their Yazid. And this is Hussein had a rebellion against Yazid, right? As if you remember, that was part of the stories that Shias keep telling their children, and you get brainwashed with, right? So for people that haven't listened to our previous episode, Yazid was the evil guy, and Hussein is the Shia leader that rebelled against Yazid. And who the Yazid is keeps changing. So when the 1979 Islamic Revolution happened, the stories were like Shah is the Yazid, and we're the army of Hussein. And then when the war, we'll get to the war between Iran and Iraq as well at some point. But then Saddam became the Yazid. Yazid was perfect because Saddam was Sunni, and there was a Shia minority. There was they weren't a minority, but he was ruling over the Shias in Iraq. And in Saudi Arabia, it's perfect as well because you had, again, the rulers were Sunni, just like Yazid, and the minority oppressed were the Shias. But even though the branding was Shia, the Wahhabis were also still inspired by Iran because they saw it's possible. They saw what Iran did. They toppled the government, right? And you have to understand, in Saudi Arabia, we have two. As we mentioned, Saudi Arabia is a marriage between two houses, right? You have the house of Saud, and you have the house of Wahhab, right? And for many years, these two groups of people built Saudi Arabia from scratch. Like, it was a literal marriage between these two houses that built Saudi Arabia. But recently, before 1979, because Saudi Arabia was so pro-United States, the House of Wahhab their power was getting less and less. So just to understand, the Saudis, the House of Saud, represents the monarchs, the capitalists, the people that just needed some religious legitimacy to stay in power, but they weren't religious themselves. They were people that were controlling the money, the oil. They were the traders. That's all they care about. And the Wahhabis were the people that cared more about religion. They wanted to make sure that everything is run by Islamic rule. And they were the ones that were giving the House of Saud, the religious authority that they need to stay in power. But because the House of Saud had a new body that was giving them legitimacy, which was the United States, they were like, we don't need this much religion anymore. And Saudi Arabia was looking more and more Western. Like they had McDonald's, they had, women were getting more and more influential. You had women newscasts,
Actually, so just this is a minor point, but Saudi Arabia actually did not have McDonald's until after the 1980s.
Well,
because it was run by Jews. That's what we heard when we grew up. The two things we didn't have there was Coca-Cola and McDonald's, because apparently those companies.
But they had a lot of Western brands.
Oh, they had everything else. Burger King. I think we had Hardee's. We had Pizza Hut. We had all the other stuff.
So you were there.
McDonald's, no. Huh?
Wait, when you say we, because you were there, like your family was there?
Yeah, I was there. I mean, I remember I left. The first McDonald's opened there sometime in the 90s.
Right, but you're talking post 1979. I'm talking about during the 1970s. It looked way more Western.
Until the late 60s. Yeah, it was. Right. It was very. That's why when MBS says that he wants to move Saudi Arabia back to the Saudi Arabia of 1967, and this
is why Mohammed bin Salman blames Iran for Saudi Arabia becoming very religious, right? This is what he said, which is a little bit true, right? But the Wahhabis were like, what the fuck is going on? Are we not here? Like, can you guys see us? Like, we're the people that made this country. Like, they felt like they were being ignored. But when they saw what happened in Iran, that gave them some inspiration. And they went and one of them captured Kaaba, right? Right? Do you want to tell that story?
Can you start? Who captured the Kaaba? Who are you saying did it?
I mean, one of the Wahhabis. I don't know I forgot his name.
Yes, he did. So, no. I thought for some reason that you said it was the Shias, but it wasn't.
No.
So what happened was that, again, as you said, the 1979 thing was very inspiring. So when in 1979, this is when King Khalid, who was before Fahd, he was the one who was the king in Saudi Arabia. And at that point, for the reasons that you talked about, when this revolution came up and Iran had a religious theocracy, right? People in Saudi Arabia, King Khalid got very threatened by this, right? First, he thought, okay, there's this huge religious uprising in Iran, and that means Shia power in Iran, and that means that the Shia community in Saudi Arabia, the minority who lives in the east, as you know, where all the oil is, they might rebel against us. So that was a big concern. Right. The second problem was that the very same year, 1979, right, a group of really conservative Sunni Muslims, right, and they decided they announced that the Mahdi, the Messiah in Islam, who's supposed to come near end times, had arrived to save humanity, and his name was Muhammad Abdullah al-Qahtani. That was his name. So they decided that since he's here, they went and they took over the Mecca Mosque. Why did they take over the Mecca Mosque? Because they felt like Saudi Arabia, which is the Holy Land, this is the leader. They wanted the leader to be a proper custodian of the holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. They felt like Saudi Arabia wasn't living up to it, saying it was too close to the Americans, right? It was too focused on money and oil and everything. The monarchy had a lot of material excesses. They weren't religious enough. All of these issues were happening. So these are the two things that scared the crap out of King Khalid, right? The Iranian Revolution, and the second thing was this seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. Eventually, they were able to stave off both of them, but only temporarily. So what they did was, King Khalid, at that time, he started giving the religious authorities and the religious police in Saudi Arabia a lot more sort of free reign, right? So he's like, go ahead. At that point, Saudi Arabia had movie theaters. Closed down all the movie theaters. When I was living there the entire time, there were no movie theaters in Saudi Arabia. right? They gave religious authorities and the religious elements in the community a greater political influence and greater role in government. The religious police, or the mutawa, which is a society for the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice. That's actually what it's called. So these guys were essentially, they could go out and just operate as regular police. They could arrest people. They could take them to their stations. They could do whatever they wanted to. And this kind of free reign allowed the monarchy to consolidate its power, right. To exploit religion as a way to consolidate its power, and also to control the threat from religious rebels in their own in their country. So that actually, this reaction was really, I think, 1979. This is when the proxy war really went on steroids.
Right. So do you want to tell what happened?
And also
when they
the Saudi was also newly, it had also become very, very rich after 1973, after the Arab-Israeli war. In 1973, when the oil prices had really, really shot up. So at that point, the Saudis were doing it. And then another thing happened, as if, the dominoes couldn't stop falling. Another thing happened is that the U.S. Went to war against the Soviets.
Before you go there, do you want to mention what happened in that they bought the bloodbath in Kaaba in 1979?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, do you know any more details on it?
Okay, so the guy went and captured Kaaba, and the Saudi authorities took permission from other religions because they were like, "Can we actually shoot at the Kaaba? Is that like a thing?" And they went and got permission to do that, and they got the permission, and the Saudi army went in, they killed everybody. There was blood over Kaaba everywhere. This was something that when I learned about, I was like, what the hell? Like, nobody told us that happened. Like, blood all over the Kaaba? Like, what the hell, right? But they killed that Wahhabi guy, but they were scared enough to be like, okay, we need to give in to Wahhabi demands, right? They were like, fine, you want religion to rule over everything? You have it. Just please don't do this again, right? And that's when Saudi Arabia became extremely more fundamentalist ever since then, right? I mean, given relative to what was there.
Interestingly, at that time when this happened, the Haram Mosque of the Kaaba, was under renovation by the Saudi bin Laden group. So, just a fun little tidbit.
But Saudi changed very fast. Like, everything started changing. Like, women covering became a lot more mandatory, the extreme. You had religious police, everything. But another thing that changed is a competition started with Iran, right? And this is where when we say Iran was most successful, right? Because Iran was like, okay, we have an Islamic Republic of Iran, but that's not where we're going to stop. We're going to export the revolution all over the region, right? And Iran, Khomeini, when Khomeini died, a lot of people think he died very successful because he achieved a lot more than many people expected. He won many, things that he was not supposed to, but it wasn't what he wanted. He thought that his revolution was going to go take over Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon, everywhere. But it was only successful in some other places outside of Iran, mostly in Lebanon, right? Which we got like Hezbollah, right? But that's the main place where outside of Iran, the Islamic Revolution was exported very successfully. But in response to that, Saudi Arabia was like, well, we're going to compete with that and export Wahhabi ideology around the Middle East in competition to Iran's exporting of their ideology. And this is where we got all this terror stuff from, as a competition to Iran, right? Because Saudi Arabia started building mosques and madrasas everywhere, right? Like, if you look at Pakistan, for example, the number of madrasas that were being built, like religious schools that were being built, the number of mosques, it just, like, if you look at the graph, it looks like a hockey stick, right? Like, it just went astronomically went higher, right?
Right.
So,
this is the part where I want to kind of slow down, because it's really interesting to how this stuff started coming to the U.S. in a very direct way, and how this ended up with the whole 9/11 thing, and how it culminated in it. So this process, it started in the 70s. Saudi Arabia becomes more religious as a response to the Iranian Revolution and the siege of Mecca and all of that. The Shia-Sunni conflict, the political conflict, is now supported by lots of oil and lots of money. Okay, so now Saudi Arabia decides to start exporting its ideology. And as you said, they started building madrasas. Madrasas are religious schools throughout Pakistan. Now, what was Pakistan doing at that time? They were getting money from Saudi Arabia to build all these madrasas. Pakistan
and
had
Afghanistan.
Pakistan had a military dictator in power at that time. His name was Zia-ul-Haq. He had killed the democratically elected prime minister, who wasn't very popular. He was very popular, but he killed him. His name was Zulfikar Bhutto. He was Benazir Bhutto's father. And he had basically taken control and made Pakistan a dictatorship. In Afghanistan, there were many people who started fighting a jihad against the Soviets, who were right north of them. So when they started fighting against the Soviets were atheists, right? They were godless people. And they were trying to take over Afghanistan. So Afghanistan basically had a whole bunch of jihadis. This is where these people were called mujahideen. Mujahideen means those who wage jihad. And their biggest supporters at the time were the United States, because the United States found a lot of solidarity with the jihadis in Afghanistan because they were fighting a war against the Soviets. So it was a major, major front against the Cold War. So then the Americans, what they started doing is they started giving a lot of money to Pakistan. Right? Because so Pakistan was helping arm the Afghanis, and they were helping sort of fund this whole thing. And meanwhile, Pakistan was also getting a lot of money from Saudi Arabia and building all these madrasas. And Saudi Arabia was doing that with oil money that it was getting from the United States. Because the U.S. was buying lots of oil money and investing in oil and Aramco and everything and over there. So suddenly everybody was very rich, and there was a lot of money behind this religious theology, especially the Sunni, Saudi, Wahhabi, Salafist version of religious ideology. Now these madrasas, what happens is they eventually, the Soviets, the Cold War ends, the Afghans get their independence. And then the students who were trained in these religious schools, the madrasas, with Saudi ideology, right? They grow up, they come of age, they get rid of the mujahideen, right? They're created essentially by Pakistani intelligence and Saudi money, and they take over Afghanistan. And these people were called the word for students in Arabic, in Persian, and in Urdu. And the word for students, the students of the madrasas, is Taliban. A talib is one student. A Taliban is a plural for students. Right. So this is how the Taliban were created. It was a direct consequence of all of this. And after the Taliban were created at that time, I remember Osama bin Laden was part of this U.S.-supported war against the Soviets that was being fought in Afghanistan. He was one of the mujahids in solidarity with the mujahideen. Later, when the United States made its way into Saudi Arabia during the 1991 Gulf War, so 1991, Saddam Hussein goes and takes over Kuwait, right? Takes over their oil. The Americans freak out because obviously that would mean that Iraq would become the biggest oil supplier in the world, essentially. A combination of Iraq and Kuwait. They want Saddam to get out of there, right? And Saddam at that time has been at war with Iran. We'll get into that in a little bit. Previously to this, and the U.S. Their armies come into Saudi Arabia. I was there at the time, 91, 92. Wow. So around 1990 and 1991, right? So I was in 12th grade at that time, 11th, 12th grade. So the American armies come into Saudi Arabia. Now, Osama bin Laden, who had been part of the Mujahideen, become very, very religious, right? He suddenly had there's a Salafist belief that the infidels cannot be in the Holy Land. Right. So interestingly, he never talked about the Palestine issue, the Kashmir issue, any other broader Islamic issues from 1996 when Al-Qaeda was formed until 1998. For the first 2 years, the only thing he talked about is why are the infidels in the Holy Land? The land of Mecca and Medina. They should not be here. Right. So he wanted to get them out. And that was, so he got found solidarity with the Taliban, ended up go in Afghanistan, plotting attacks against the U.S., declaring war against the U.S., blowing up the embassies in Africa in 1998, the USS Cole, all of these, even the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the attempted bombing of it. I mean, so that was one thing that preceded it.
Right.
But all of this eventually developed from that, and that's what ultimately led to 9/11.
So, can I add something here?
Yeah, sure.
So the thing is,
that was, by the way, sorry, that was really, really fast. I tried to summarize it as fast as I could.
Right. So the main point to remember is that these people, these Wahhabis, they hate Shias, and the main point of Saudi funding going to a lot of these people around Iran was, as a response to Iran's growing power in the region, right? But the problem with the way this backfired on Saudi Arabia is, unlike Iran, because when Iran managed to really have control over its, when it sent out the Vilayat Faqih version of Shia Islam around the places that it successfully did. And again, you have to understand that it works in different layers, right? You first look at the places that are already Shia, and then you convince them, then you spread Vilayat Faqih there, and then it's like a pyramid, right? And then from the people that are loyal to Iran, then a small percentage of it will even fight for it or do its bidding, right? That's why, but you lay the foundation, Shiism, then Vilayat Faqih, then the people that will even die for you, right? But which is a smaller percentage, but it's still big enough. The problem, the thing is that Iran managed to do this so effectively. There are people in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Bahrain, in Yemen, that will give their lives for the leaders in different numbers in different places. By the way, a lot of people are like, oh no, that's not true in Yemen. No, or in this place or in that place. No, I'm talking different places have different numbers, but they have that control. They can call upon people that will pick up arms for Khamenei. But Saudi Arabia didn't do that effectively. It's just like, hey, madrasas, Wahhabism. And the Wahhabis, they don't like the monarchs, right? They don't like, they're like, yeah, they take the money and they spread Wahhabism, but they didn't spread loyalty to the Saudi government. They only spread Wahhabism. In fact, based on Wahhabi teachings, the Saudi government is one of the greatest evils out there, right? So what Saudi Arabia created was a Frankenstein monster that will come and kill its own creator if it could, right? But it wasn't like what Iran created, which was like a dog on a leash, which Iran could control every way it wants, right? The greatest Wahhabi fundamentalists, if you give them enough power, they will go and kill Mohammed bin Salman if they had the chance, which is very But so the thing is that these whole when ISIS and Al Qaeda was born out of these spreading Wahhabism. By the way, a lot of people in Pakistan say, like, before 1979. The Sunnis in Pakistan, we didn't know that there was two kinds of us. Like, we didn't, like, some of them do, but they didn't. A lot of people, like, we were just Muslim. We didn't know that we were Shias and Sunnis, right? Like, we didn't know we were supposed to hate the Shias. Like, a lot of these things was introduced to more people because of this whole divide between, it spread to other places like Afghanistan and Pakistan because of both of them trying to spread their ideology around. Like, I'm not saying it didn't exist before this, because it did. Like, Shias and Sunnis have been fighting each other for hundreds of years, but it keeps going up and down a little bit. But because after 1979 is one of those times that it went really high up, right? So, we have like pictures of Muslims in Africa, for example, holding Khomeini's picture, which was sold as propaganda to us all over in Iran during our childhood. But here's the thing: Khomeini died, really hating Saudi Arabia. Like, we did not know this as kids, right? Khomeini's hate was for Saudi Arabia more than it was for Israel, more than it was for United States, more than it was for Saddam, more than anybody. Khomeini hated. So Khomeini went to war with.
This is. I'm gonna just one really quick to interrupt. Even today, you see that it's the same way the other way around. Saudi Arabia has formed an alliance with Israel so it could fight against Iran. So they will even go and get together with the Jews so they can fight the Shia.
They will make a pact. Saudi Arabia,
and the same way the other way around.
If the devil shows up on earth and goes to Saudi government and like, hey, I'm the actual devil, and I can help you against Iran, the Saudi government will take that deal. But the thing, so Khomeini was very disappointed with Iraq, because if you're not successful in Saudi Arabia is at least, can at least say, well, Saudi Arabia is mostly Sunni, okay, but Iraq is mostly Shia. So that should have been like Iran thought like it could get the Shias in Iraq to rebel against Saddam. Like, how could you not? Like, you're a Shia majority, you're being ruled by a Sunni minority. We are your Shia brotherhood. Like, if other Muslims all of a sudden realize that, hey, this is a Shia revolution, not an Islamic revolution, we can't support this. Well, why can't the Muslims in Iraq support us? Why can't the Muslim in Iraq say, like, well, we are Shia, we can get behind this revolution, we could topple Saddam? It didn't happen. One thing that Khomeini tried and was unsuccessful is, like, Khomeini didn't like the Iran, oh, we're Iran, this is for the glory of Iran. Khomeini was like, no, fuck that, this is Islam. But nationalism is so strong in Iran that it had to be used. Like, against the war with Iraq, it was something that it had to be tapped into because it was too powerful of a force not to tap into. So even Khomeini didn't like it. This whole we are the army of Hussein against the Yazid, God mixed with glorifying Iran against Iraq as well. Like, so fuck Iraq, Iran for the win. So because that was there to take advantage of, all of this got mixed together, right? And the thing is that the Iraqis were also like, the Iraqis that were fighting at the side of Saddam, they also kind of saw this as like, no, this is not Shias coming and helping their fellow Shia brethren. This is Iran versus Iraq. So nationalism all of a sudden became too strong of a force compared to religion for the Shias to be on Khomeini's side. They're like, no, fuck you, we're going to defend Iraq against Iran. This has nothing to do with Shia Sunni. But even though Khomeini, so the war ended, and we were told throughout our childhood in Iran that we won that war. But I thought like, okay, Iran won the Iran-Iraq war. But then when I left Iran, I realized that actually the Iraqis were told the same thing, that they actually won that war. But apparently nobody won that war. Right? They both lost millions of people, and the borders stayed pretty much the same before, as like it was a useless war. Nobody won. Millions of very young children. Ali, I don't know if you know this, but so in Iran's army there were children. They took children and they would put them at the front. They would use them as minesweepers, right?
They were landmines. They were human landmines, the kids, right. And they put keys around them, their necks. They were keys to heaven because you're going to die, and then this is your key to heaven. You're going to go to heaven.
The kids were told that today, you like...
during the Iran-Iraq war.
Yes, let me tell you. I can't tell you how many times my teachers, like I had many different teachers in Iran, and other people like shopkeepers that told us stories about the war. Grown men will cry.
Yeah.
And cry that they didn't die, that they didn't become martyr. Like they say that they're upset that they weren't lucky enough to die so that they could be a martyr for Hussein. They were like, oh, my friend was so lucky, and they would start crying. I'm like, oh, I didn't die. How I wish I was killed so I could have been a martyr. And they would like have tears, right? But right. Another thing that they did, people would, like the kids and young people, like the young soldiers, like we're talking 14, sometimes 12, okay? They will, and 20, many different, most of them very young. They would wake up in the middle of the night and they would see, like, they would like, look, they would hire actors on a white horse in the middle of the night. A man on a white horse would show up, and they were like, we were visited by Hussein, and people would like, holy shit, I'm gonna be a martyr today because I saw Hussein today, and they would go, and this is why. People thought this was an easy win because Saddam Hussein had United States backing, had Saudi Arabia's backing. Iran had nothing. Iran just went through a revolution, and the whole government, it was a new government, all the institutions had collapsed. People were like, this is why Saddam was so motivated to go into this war, because this was like, okay, they just had a new government. I'm just gonna go pick up some land here with some, some very important land, because they had the access to the Persian Gulf, some Khuzestan with all its oil and everything. And we're like, okay, you guys, the whole government is like going through a crisis. Let's go pick up some land here. And if anybody was a betting man, they would bet on Iraq's side. But Iran, they didn't win, but they didn't lose any land. And the reason why, because they had a army, like, how you see an army of the dead, you had millions of people that didn't have to be paid anything because they were all volunteers and they were all willing to die. Like, the sea of people that showed up to fight against Iraq was unbelievable, and you could only get that with religious indoctrination, because they were not paid, they were all volunteers, and they were all willing to die. Iraq did not have anything like that. They had better weapons, they had Saudi and United States backing, but they didn't have a sea of people that were not afraid of dying, right? And that's why Iran didn't lose. But go on.
No, I was just saying, did you already talk about the most interesting thing to me is why the Iran-Iraq war started?
Right, go on.
Right, just and what happened with the Iraq war that Bush waged, and how Iran ultimately won that war with the help of the U.S., which is okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. The Iran-Iraq war basically started because after the revolution in Iran.
Oh, you're getting closer to now.
I'm talking about 1980 when the Iran-Iraq war started.
Okay. So you are going to compare that to the Iraq invasion later?
I'm gonna talk about how it came full circle and how.
Okay, go on.
Iran essentially played the U.S. Right. in a lot of ways, and this is something that a lot of people don't like hearing.
They didn't even have to play them; it was gifted to them. But go on.
Exactly. It was gifted to them.
Go on.
And this is one of the reasons why there was no Shia coming out and protesting Bush's Iraq war. Anyway, so what happened was Iran and Iraq. So Iranian Revolution happens, right? Before that, Iran, they enjoy a decent relationship.
One thing, can I just add? Iran at some point during the war was winning a lot, and they got greedy because the United Nations came and they were like, let's sign a peace agreement, right? And Iran was like, why would you sign a peace agreement? We're winning. So they didn't, and then all of a sudden Saddam had a comeback, and Iran had took over a lot of land.
You said penis agreement.
Did I?
Yeah, you did. That was hilarious.
Okay, penis, whatever. I said peace. I said peace agreement.
No, you said penis agreement. Okay. Hey, patrons, did anybody hear that? Or people listening? Did Armin not say penis agreement?
That's your fucked up mind.
I thought that was fucking hilarious. Anyway,
another say we got a super chat. Make leaders smoke weed and talk their differences. Okay.
Have you seen Nader? Have you seen the Ali G, the first Ali G movie?
Thank you for the super chat.
Ali G in the House is it's premised on that. It's about world leaders solving problems by smoking weed.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
What, Ali? You ruined my chain of thought. Okay, so we had. Fuck. What was I saying?
I know.
All right, so Iran had took over a lot of land, and they were like very confident. And if you listen to a lot of the songs, right, that they were singing when they were winning, they like to tomorrow in Karbala, and after that in Quds. So they were so confident. They thought like, okay, we're gonna get Karbala. The whole point was to get Karbala. Karbala was in Iraq, and Karbala is where Hussein died, and that's the holiest place for Shia Muslims. And a lot of Shia Muslims, I would argue that for Shia Muslims, Karbala is more important than Kaaba, than Mecca. They won't admit that, but that's the truth. Okay, and the fact that a Sunni government holds Karbala is an insult to Shia Muslims, and they were like, we're gonna take Karbala, like they were so. And then after they think they're gonna take Karbala, we're gonna take Kaaba and Mecca from Saudi Arabia, and eventually they will take Quds, Jerusalem, from Israel. They're like, we're gonna go all the way, man. Like there's nothing is gonna stop us, right? So yeah, but that's why they didn't say yes to the peace agreement. But then Saddam all of a sudden had a comeback, took over a lot of the lands that Iran took, and then at that point, the United Nations, everybody else come like, come on, guys, you're losing.
Let's
let me finish this thought. Let me finish this thought. And Khomeini, then people came to Khomeini and said like, we can't do this anymore. It's been 8 years of war. We have to sign the peace agreement. And Khomeini said that that he's going to drink the jam of poison, the cup of poison, right? Just like Socrates, right? Like
before he signs a peace agreement.
Like no. He said like his signing of the peace agreement was him drinking poison, and he signed it reluctantly. And ever since then, he wasn't seen that outside speaking anymore. Like that, I think depressed the hell out of him. But go on, Ali. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to set the stage for how this all happened. So in 1979, the revolution happened, Iranian Revolution happened.
Right.
Now, Iran was ruled by the Shah for the longest time, and now, Khomeini's in power, right? Religious theocracy.
Beej is saying she went back and she heard peace. So it's.
I know, and I responded to that. I said that you said it a few times. Okay. I'm pretty sure one of them was penis, but it could be a connection issue. But
no,
either way,
it's just your mind.
I thought it was. Anyway, that will be a mystery. I will check again, and maybe I'm wrong. Okay. I thought I heard it. Anyway, so again, I've been trying to get this out for a while. Right. So what happens is that Iran is obviously majority Shia. Right, over 90%. Right. Now, Iraq is also majority Shia. So Iraq is about 65 to 70% Shia, but has historically always been ruled by a Sunni leader. Right, so Saddam Hussein was ruling Iraq. He was a dictator. Mm-hmm. Sunni. He ran his party was called the Ba'ath Party.
Right.
In Iraq, very powerful. They'd taken power by force. Obviously, and they were the Sunnis enjoyed a lot of benefits. The Shias were the majority, but they generally were not as socioeconomically well off as the Sunnis, and they didn't really have as many rights. They were basically oppressed. At least that's pretty documented. So what happens is that when Iran becomes a Shia powerhouse, right, then Saddam gets a little concerned. He's like, okay, now I've got like 65 to 70% of my people are Shia. They're probably going to be like influenced, or they're probably all galvanized and excited and adrenalized by this whole Iranian Revolution thing. So now this is a bit of a threat to me. So he even praised the Iranian Revolution as a political move, and when he did that, Khomeini basically said, "Yeah, whatever, fuck you."
Yeah,
like he rejected the praise, and that pissed off Saddam Hussein.
Right.
So there were an issue. So they made a big deal about this waterway. They shared some water supply along one of their borders, Iran and Iraq, and he essentially made it about that, a territorial dispute, and then both of the countries went to war, and Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, and Iran actually, I think, was happy about it. Khomeini was very happy about it, because even though Saddam realized very early on that this was a mistake, that he should not have done this was causing a lot of issues.
Right.
After when the war ended, he was one of the reasons he attacked Kuwait and he tried to take over Kuwait is because his resources, the riches had been so depleted by the time the war ended, because Khomeini had prolonged it. Khomeini looked at this as a jihad, and he was happy to send kids. He was happy to use kids as landmines and do whatever, and made it a big jihad against. But now So what's interesting is that Saddam was actually concerned And at that time, the U.S. was more in support of Saddam, right? The U.S. was supporting you. Everybody's seen those pictures of Rumsfeld and Cheney, holding hands with, shaking hands with Saddam Hussein and hugging him and everything like that. So the U.S. was supporting Iraq at the time because the U.S. was the great Satan, according to Iran.
Right.
So now what happens is that after all of this is over, right? Then Iraq takes over Kuwait. You have the first Gulf War in '91. And then later on, you have 9/11. And then after 9/11, about 12 years after the first Gulf War, 11 years after the first Gulf War, Bush's son decides to go back into Iraq and, get rid of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
And then once he does that, all of the Shia Iranians, the Sistani, all of these guys are quiet. They're like, okay, come on in. Because what did the Iranians want to do when they came into power in 1979? Is that they wanted a nice, strong, robust belt of Shia influence across the Arab world, right? They had that, so they wanted the population of Iraq. Now, what was going to happen with the Gulf War that Bush did? That Iraq now was going to become a democracy. That was the goal. If it became a democracy, 70% Shia population, Iraq would become another Shia-ruled state that would form an alliance with Iran. Right. So Iran was happy. They're like, holy shit. This is what we kind of wanted all along, and now the U.S. is giving it to us on a platter, right? Even though they supported the other side for 8 years. So this kind of thing, this is one thing that Bush astoundingly did not understand, and Americans did not understand. But a lot of Shias they couldn't believe what was happening.
Right.
They're like, this is exactly what Iran wanted the whole time. This is exactly why they went to war with Iraq. And the U.S. supported Iraq at that time. And now that war is over, the U.S. just comes back and is like, oh, here you go. You wanted Iraq to be a Shia-ruled, Shia-majority country that could form an alliance with you? Here you go. We're handing it to you.
Actually, the Saudis were warning United States. Like, the Saudis were begging United States not to attack Saddam. And they were like, you're handing over this country to Iran if you do this. And United States ignored that. Right? Saudis were so frustrated at that time with United States. And, there's two things that we saw on TV that to me was highlighted how significant, how big of a win this was for Iran. When I saw in Baghdad posters of Khamenei and Khomeini go up, I was like, holy shit, this was Khomeini's wet dream. What they could not achieve by 8 years of war, millions of kids dead, so much blood, money, sacrifice, all of it, Iran couldn't achieve. And all of a sudden they just stood back, and then the Shia, they saw Baghdad is ours. They didn't have to do with nothing, right? And but it's not really nothing, because Iran did invest. Throughout this time, Iran spread its politics all over the Middle East. Iran invested in building connections all over where Shias were dominant, right? So when Saddam fell, Iran already had all its tentacles in the right place in Iraq for it to be able to take advantage of that. Another thing that was significant that showed when we saw on TV, and the Shia world watched on TV with awe and hope, okay? Because you have to understand, Saddam did not let Shias do the Ashura, do the Sinazani, do all the Shia rituals in Karbala, where the Shias wanted to do for many, many years. They weren't able to do in such a big way under Saddam, right? Because Shia Islam is so dangerous. It's a rebellious. Shia Islam is perfect for rebellion. When you get so many Shias in a place and they say fuck Yazid, we're the army of Hussein, people know what you mean when you say Yazid, because if you're living under Saddam, Yazid is dog whistle for Saddam. Or whoever is ruling over you. When you say we're going to kill Yazid, that's dog whistle for whoever is in power there. And you have so many people there saying that they were willing to die for Hussein, and that's just a perfect climate for, if you could say like, hey, you could get together for religious gatherings, but you can't get together as a protest against me. Well, guess what? People getting together as a religious gathering could technically be like that turn into a protest against you. That's why they're very sensitive about Shia's rituals. By the way, we got 2 super chats that you have to read. But
and I'll read them right now. They're actually both from Nader Al-Qam, and Nader Al-Qam is saying, the first one, he said, your show deserves more viewers, such high quality. Thank you, Nader. I mean,
Thank you so much.
We feel like we're just kind of sitting in the living room and chatting. So it's, it's amazing that people want to listen to us.
Thank you so much.
The second one, he said that he had to go. Have a good night. Thank you for enlightening the mind.
Right.
Thanks again, Nader. And remember, you can come back and you can listen to this. This is public. It'll be available. So if you have to leave, you can catch up on it later.
Thank you so much for the donations. We do really need it for the show. So I really appreciate it. But anyways, let me tell you what happened. When Saddam was not there, the first Ashura, the Shias showed up in such numbers. I don't know what the numbers were, but it was because this was like, finally Karbala is back to is in Shia hand now. Karbala, the holiest place on earth for Shias. Again, a lot of Shias would say deny this. They say no, just like other Muslims, Mecca is the holiest place on earth for us. It's not true. Karbala is the holiest place for Shias. And now Saddam has fallen, and it's in the hands of Shias. And now it's Ashura, and they could do their rituals properly without anybody telling them not to. And thousands of people showed up. The scene was so, the numbers of people that showed up to do all the rituals, it was being broadcasted, and it moved Shias all around the world watching their TV. It moved them to tears that we have Karbala now. And the Shias themselves were shocked about how many Shias are in Iraq, and how many of them are so passionate about Shia Islam. And it inspired all of them that, yes, we are a Shia brotherhood. So in Iraq, by the way, the nationalists in Iraq are like, no, fuck this shit. What is Iran doing in our country? We are independent. Iran has no right to meddle, right? So, again, a lot of people might hear this. Iraqis might come and hear this. They're like, what are you saying, Armin? This is not true. We don't like Iran meddling in our countries. We're fucking tired of Iran meddling in our politics. But, again, everybody will try to make their opinion as if it's a majority opinion, okay? The truth is that Iran, the only reason why Iran has so much influence in Iraq is because a lot of people in Iraq see themselves as part of Iran, right? And again, this is Ali. This is a different discussion. This is why a lot of neo-Zoroastrian, anti-Islamic, pro-Persian Empire Iranians some of them are now backing this government, because they're saying that the whole Persian Empire that they were hoping for, this government seems to be closer to it than ever before, and that's why some of them are tempted to back up this government, right? But the thing is that, do you want to explain the Shia Crescent and why that's so scary? You have to understand that Iran is doing all of this all over the Middle East, even though the Shias are minority in Islam. Like, what is the percentage of Shias compared to the Sunnis?
20%.
20%. So,
or less, yeah.
But the thing is that the Shias are more united than the Sunnis. And that's why, even though they're 20%, they seem to be becoming more and more influential all over the Middle East. And
right.
also because even though Sunnis are supposed to be 80%, a lot of that 80% is in Indonesia and Malaysia too. So it becomes a little bit more balanced if you look at the Middle East, right?
Right.
But
the thing is, like, the regional influence, like, when you're talking about the Islamic Crescent across the Middle East right now. So you have Iran, you have Iraq. There are several other Shia majority countries, or countries that have a large proportion of Shias, like Bahrain, is one of them. There are a lot of Shias in Lebanon, and Syria.
Right.
So, and like, the Alawis are also considered Shias, technically. Right. So like Bashar al-Assad and his whole
But do you want to explain what? Okay, the countries where Iran is becoming more and more influential. By the way, anybody that tells you this is politics and not religion, tell them to go fuck themselves, because it's so obviously both. And the fact that Iran's influence keeps growing exactly where the Shias are the majority, like, is that like a coincidence? Like, everybody thinks that has nothing to do with religious, like, people that want to say like, oh, Iran, Saudi Arabia, it's just about oil and politics, has nothing to do, like, a lot of Shias and Sunnis that want to like promote Shia Sunni unity, they try to keep telling you that this is just politics. It has nothing to do with about the divide between Shias and Sunnis, right?
Yeah, but it was interesting. Like, Obama once said that, this is a conflict that has been going on for 1,400 years,
right,
or for millennia, and people were really upset. They're like, no, this is not that. This started with Saudi Arabia. Right. But he was absolutely right. It hasn't been going on for millennia. This is a religious conflict.
No, but when people say this is politics, not religion, they don't understand that Islam is...
It's a false dichotomy.
It's a political religion. It's like... Yeah, go on.
That's just really quick. Politics and religion, what makes something political? Right. Okay, when you have a nationalistic sort of element in your thing, like Abrahamic religions have that all the time, right? You have you've got Zionism, nationalistic movement. Jihad is a nationalistic driven movement, right? When you have claims to territory, they have that as well. You have caliphates, you've got holy lands. When you have heaven and hell, reward and punishment as a way to manipulate people into mass forms of behavior, and manipulate the masses into behaving a certain way, that is immediately political. So all of the apocalypse, all of this stuff it's all political. Anything that has to do with land. So there's no now the thing is, the advantage where the intersection of ethnicity and religion comes into play is exactly this. Now let's just explain it this way. When Iran goes out and they start talking about how they want to wipe Israel off the map, okay, this happens all the time. Now, if you think about it, will Iran develop nuclear weapons? Will they ever go and attack Israel?
Ali, you have 10 minutes to hard ending, and I have so much to say.
Okay, I'm going to get to that. Okay. No. We're now transitioning into like the sort of the current situation.
Okay.
So Armin, even though I have a hard stop at about 10 minutes, Armin, if you want to go on, you totally can.
I can't do it without you.
Yeah, you can. You can do it, or we can come back for part 2.
No, we have to finish this because we said it's a 3-part series. Can you just say for like 30 minutes?
I'll say for I'll say for 10 minutes. Oh. So we have 20 minutes from now, and then
go fast, but short.
No, let me. This is very, very important.
Okay,
to
go
this, right? So, what was I talking about, Armin?
I forgot.
Okay, no, I was saying when Iran talks about wiping Israel off the face of the earth, right? So when they say that, Iran is not realistically going to go and bomb Israel with a nuke. Why are they not going to do that? Because when they do that, they're going to mostly kill Palestinians. It's such a small area, and that's what's going to happen. They cannot do that. But what they will do is they will scream out and they will say that we want to erase the Jews, we want to kill the Jews, we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Now, what happens with that? What happens with that is that there are all these dictators in Arab countries who don't want to speak up against Israel. MBS doesn't want to speak up against them. Sisi doesn't want to speak up against them. But the people in Saudi Arabia don't like Israel. The people in Egypt, a lot of the Arabs and the Muslims over there don't like them. They want their leaders, they want their Arab dictatorial leaders to say the kind of stuff that Iran is saying.
Right.
But their leaders don't say it. So Iran comes out looking to these Arabs like, okay, these Arabs are suddenly saying, look, Ahmadinejad is going and saying all this stuff. He's denying the Holocaust. He's saying all this stuff about Israel. Why don't our leaders have the balls to do it? Now, what happens there is that Iran can use religion to solidify its influence because, again, these Arabs are never going to become Persian. It's not going to happen. Their ethnicities are not going to change. But they can become Shia. In Hamas, right? Hamas is a very hardcore Sunni organization. Like Palestinians are overwhelmingly Sunni, right? But Iran has a lot of influence over there. And Iran, the Shia thing works very well. Hezbollah is the military Shia arm of Iran. And they're very revered by people in Palestine. People love Hezbollah.
I have so much to say, and you're not giving me time. All right.
No, but this is important.
Okay,
this
yeah, but you said it. But you said it. But you have a super chat.
No, whoa, wait. This is kind of
faster.
This is the crux of it, right? Okay. So this is the crux. So now you have all of these insane alliances over there. You've got hardcore Muslim Brotherhood backed like Hamas and their supporters who are getting loads of support from Iran in the form of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is an Iranian arm, which is also Arab, not Iranian, but they're an Arab arm. And they were the only ones to have, who Arabs think actually held Israel off in 2006 in that war. They feel like they actually have a lot of things. So Iran is also fighting, Iran is also fighting. Sorry, I'm trying to get into all this. There's so many tangles. There's Yemen, there's ISIS, there's... We're talking, but you get the idea in terms of how Iran uses religion to extend its influence.
All right, I'm going to read the super chat because you're too slow. Sohan is give us $2 super chats. Thank you, Sohan. It says it's politics, not nationalism. He put it in quotation marks. I think you're saying that's what other people say. Thank you, Sohan, for your super chat. All right, I'm really going to go quickly over many things that I wish I had more time to explain in detail, but. I'm going to put them all together as to show why Iran looks to have the upper hand here today and going forward, and what are the weaknesses of Iran going forward, right? So if you look at what people refer to as the Shia Crescent, right? And this is why when Saudi Arabia looks at a map and looks at Iran's influence in the region, when they become so paranoid, because if you look at the Shia Crescent, you have Iran. And you could look at the influence of Iran. They now have Iraq. Okay, so Saddam fell, made Iraq a puppet of Iran, technically. In Syria, if Assad had fell, that would have been bad for Iran because Assad is Shia ruling over Sunnis, but Assad stayed. So Saddam, which was beneficial for Iran to fall, fell. Assad, which was beneficial for Iran to stay, because now Assad stayed thanks to Iran's support, and now because it was thanks to Iran's support, Syria became now more of a puppet of Iran. But this scares the shit out of Israel, because now Iran has a direct land, because from Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Israel. Like you could just take an Uber all the way. Then not Uber, but. You get my point. And
the problem is like the Sunni powerhouse in Syria, and Iraq, the people who are fighting Assad and all these Iran allies are ISIS. So you can't side with ISIS if you want to propose Iran.
No,
so that's also another problem.
This is why Iran loved the fact that ISIS grew, because Iran learned this from United States. Like, we're here because we're fighting ISIS. We're here because we're fighting ISIS. Like, we're here because we're fighting terrorists. Like, you need us to fight ISIS. And then ISIS fell, and yeah, but we're not leaving, right? So we came here to fight.
Obama had to we're just not getting involved in Syria. Like, we're screwed. We've got Iran backed Assad on one side. We've got the ISIS.
Ali, you're not letting me speak. Okay, so Iran went there to fight ISIS, but when ISIS fell, Iran is like, we're not leaving anymore. This is our home now. Okay, so now Iran has military bases and everything. And this is why Israel is looking at the United States like, are you seeing this? Like, why are you not doing anything? They're right next door to us. And the US is like, hey, sorry, we with Iraq war, there's no more any of us that brings a war anymore. We're not going to win elections anymore, right? So because people in the United States are tired of war. Maybe that's why you could suggest war in second terms of your presidency instead of your first term, because if you introduce it in your first term of presidency, your chances of re-elections are much lower. Anyway, so you have the Shia Crescent, but the Shia Crescent goes all the way down Saudi Arabia. So this is right above Saudi Arabia, and you have Iran into the east of Saudi Arabia, but then you go all the way Bahrain, even to east of Bahrain is majority Shia. This is why and ruled by Sunnis. That's why it's scary to Bahraini people. And then you go right under, you have Yemen. Yemen is mostly Shia, and that becomes another proxy for Iran, and that's why
you have the war in Yemen.
You have the war in Yemen going on, because the war in Yemen is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's why all the greatest humanitarian crisis of our time right now is happening in Yemen because of the proxy war between Shia Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia. And also a few examples of how Saudi Arabia is how Iran is good at playing politics in around it and using its pawns. Iran has so many proxies. Like there's a list. You just keep losing. Like the most famous one is Hezbollah, but you also have Shabi. You have Shabi. All over. You have so many different groups, and they're all in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and Iran is playing them very well. Saudi Arabia sucks at this game, and here are 3 examples of how it sucks. First of all, Saudi Arabia thought it could win the war in Yemen like this in 3 weeks, but it couldn't even win it in 3 years. Even though Saudi Arabia has the most advanced weaponry, the largest weapons deal in history with the United States, has the most advanced, the most newest military equipment. Saudi Arabia can't even beat the Houthis, and the Houthis have nothing. The Houthis don't even have shoes, okay? And Saudi Arabia cannot beat them. Like after years of war, and then think about it. Like if you can't beat the Houthis, what are your chances against Iran? Iran defeated ISIS all over the Middle East. So if Iran is so successful, and you can't even beat the Houthis, like it makes people think like Iran has the upper hand. And Iran loves that Saudi Arabia is wasting so much money in Yemen. It knows because of Saudi ego they can't leave, because they can't leave as if they don't win, and they're wasting millions of dollars, billions of dollars in Yemen, money that they don't have. They're spending it, and Iran loves it that they're wasting so much money there. Saudi Arabia kidnapped the Prime Minister of Lebanon. They kidnapped the Prime Minister of Lebanon because Iran's power play in Lebanon, again, this is very complicated.
That, by the way, was one of the most comically ridiculous stories I've ever seen. So I couldn't believe it was actually happening.
Yeah, I couldn't. I was like, what the hell is happening? But it was such a disaster, like Saudi Arabia, and it backfired on them. Because in Lebanon, if you look at what's because Lebanon, to avoid civil war, they came up with a weird deal that how does it work? The head of the parliament has to always be Shia, the prime minister has to always be Sunni, and the president has to always be Christian. Did I get that right? Yes, I got that right. I think I got that right. Right? So
something like that.
That's right. The prime minister is Sunni, right? And the head of the parliament is Shia. So that's obviously Iran's proxy. And Saudi Arabia was like, okay, well, prime minister is Sunni, so that's our proxy. So when they see Hariri, which is the prime minister in Lebanon, go and starts making deals, having meetings with Iran and trying to become closer to them, Saudi Arabia is like, what the fuck? Like the Sunni part of, Iran has already so much control over Lebanon. And now the Sunni part is also now speaking to Iran and playing footsies with them. So they're like, hey Hariri, come to Saudi Arabia, we want to talk to you. And he comes to Saudi Arabia, and all of a sudden he's kidnapped. They take him hostage, and they put a camera in front of him, and he has to read off a script, and he's like, Iran should stay out of Lebanon. And it was so obvious. It was so obvious that people were making jokes on social media, telling their prime minister to blink twice if he's being taken hostage. But it was so embarrassing that they had. But Hezbollah, the Shia parts of Lebanon, the Shia power in Lebanon, they played it very well because Saudi Arabia was hoping that this is going to cause a civil divide, a civil war in Lebanon between Shias and Sunnis, and Shias were like, no. When it comes to foreign powers, we're all Lebanese. There is no Shia Sunni, right? So they're like, so a lot of Sunnis were impressed with Hezbollah, which are Shias, that they're like, we're uniting with our Sunni brothers and sisters, and we want our prime minister back. They're like, we have political conflicts with Sunnis in Lebanon, but that's an internal political divide. When it comes to foreign power, we're all Lebanese united, and we're gonna demand our prime minister back. And what Saudi Arabia did backfired, because instead of dividing Sunnis and Shias in Lebanon, for the first time, Sunnis and Shias were united more than ever before against Saudi Arabia, in such a way that the Sunnis in Lebanon were against Saudi Arabia. So it really backfired on Saudi Arabia, that move. So Yemen backfired. The decision by Saudi Arabia on Yemen backfired. The decision in Lebanon kidnapping the prime minister backfired, and the Qatar blockade. That backfired. Like, these people, I don't know who's giving advice to Saudi regime to just wake up and decide to, like, hey, let's put a blockade on Qatar. That's not going to backfire, right? So they're like, Qatar is getting too close to Iran. We can't have that. Nobody deals with Qatar. Is going to become isolated. If we stop dealing, let's get our all Sunni buddies, like Egypt, everybody, all the Sunni countries get together, like, fuck you, Qatar. You have to apologize. You have to close Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera is very, like, Qatar was also playing footsie with Muslim Brotherhood, and which Saudi Arabia also hates. And so, like, you have to close down Al Jazeera. You have to never deal with Iran again. You have to do this, unless the blockade will stay. And Qatar are like, fuck that. We're not going to do any of that. Keep your blockade. And because of that blockade, it benefited Qatar's economy, because they started exploring other countries, and they relaxed the barriers to trade with other countries and became a more open economy. And now Qatar is in a stronger position, and they pushed them even closer to Iran because of that, even though Qatar is Sunni. So that backfired. So
Sohan D'Souza, from Sohan, we've got a super chat.
I read that.
And he's saying, yeah, it's politics, not nationalism.
No, I read that already.
And, you did? Okay, go ahead.
But, and the last reason why Iran looks like it has an upper hand is Palestine, okay? What Ali mentioned. Palestine is a political tool, all right? Like, Iran loves using, the only way to get Sunni backing by Iran, because Iran has Shiism, and, like, you get Shias to back you because Iran is Shias, and, everybody else is Sunni. But Iran wants to increase its dominance even in Sunni areas, and the way you sell you do your PR in Sunni areas is by this is what Turkey is now getting behind, as doing better as well, by acting like the only champions that has the backing of Palestine against Israel, right? And this is what Israelis don't understand, how important this is when it comes to winning the hearts and mind of all Muslims, regardless of being Shias and Sunnis. Because when you are so afraid of Iran that you start getting close to Israel, then you lose your, Iran has built all these connections everywhere, and you try to do the same thing. Well, you lost the game. If you get close to Israel, you become the devil in the minds of all the Muslims, regardless of being Shia and Sunni, right? And Iran, this is why I know Iran wants the Palestinians to suffer, okay? Iran wants the Palestinians to suffer because their suffering is one of the most powerful political tools.
All the Arab world wants the Palestinians. Like, they benefit from it. Hamas benefits from it. They have admitted that they use Palestinian children as human shields. Right. They have put out, there's videos of them telling people to come out on the rooftops during Israeli bombardment with their kids so that Israel doesn't bomb them when it sees the kids. That's why they strike from within hospitals and schools like that. So it's, if you are pro-Palestinian, right, and I'm pro-Palestinian in terms of supporting the Palestinian people, you have to be in opposition to Hamas.
Right.
You have to be against Hamas as much as you're against anything else.
So read the super chat, and I just have 2 closing remarks. Okay. Read the super chat. You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, there's another super chat.
Yes, Sohan.
Oh, okay. So it's from Sohan. So Sohan again. He's saying it's politics, not nationalism, was meant to be analogous to the it's politics, not religion canard. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's what people say. Like, when you say it's politics, not religion, or it's politics, not nationalism, or it's culture, not religion, or whatever. It's basically like saying it wasn't falling out of the plane that killed you. It was the ground. It's. I mean, both of them are factors, right?
Right. So closing remarks is that you just have to understand when you look at Iran, okay. Iran's the Shia fundamentalists in Iran. Again, this is not all of Iran, but the people with the IRGC, the Sepah Pastaran, and the people, the Vilayat Faqih people, the Shorai Negahban, all of those people, the understanding that they have is that it's not about Iran. Okay, this is about the Islamic Revolution and exporting it, and it's a service to humankind to export. This is a gift from Imam Zaman to Iran. It started in Iran, and it will take over, right? And if you look at what I always mention, like you look at what the CIA equivalent in Iran is called Quds, the Quds army, right? So what you have in Iran, the branch of the IRGC that is responsible for foreign activity, foreign intervention, for spying, for all of that, is named after Quds, which is Jerusalem, because that's their final destination. The goal of these people is not just to protect Iran from foreign power. The goal of these people is to take over Karbala. Karbala belongs to Shias. To take over the two holy cities, which is Medina and Mecca. They should not be in the hands of the non-Muslims, which are the Sunnis. The people, those lands will one day, they think, belong to Iran. They will take Jerusalem one day from Israel. That land should not belong to the Jews. It should not belong to Israel. These are the lands that they will take. And the interesting thing is that some new movements in Iran, this is why some nationalists in Iran, you have to understand, in Iran, nationalist types are usually anti-religious, right? But there are some elements of the nationalist group that, even though they're anti-Islam in Iran, are being sympathetic to this, because the lands that are Shia are also the lands that used to be the Persian Empire before Islam took over. And these nationalist type think Iran is not what you see on the map today. The one that looks like a cat. They said that's not Iran. When they think Iran, they're looking at the map during Dariush, or during the Haqamanashi dynasty, right? That's Iran. And if all of these Shia parts belongs to the Iran, it looks very closely to that map. So some of these nationalist types want to support this government to bring all those lands back to Iran, or at least make it proxies of Iran. The last closing remark that I have is to bring all these three episodes together, from what started it all to where we are at, is that you have to see the influence of these stories and these ideas. Is basically, if you put it all together, you could argue that right now we have the greatest humanitarian crisis in our lives happening in Yemen. You have terrorist organizations rising up from the Middle East because of the proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
You have people trying to establish caliphates.
You have people. All of this happened because Aisha lost her necklace.
Yes.
Right?
Oh God, what a wonderful way to end it. All of this happened because Aisha lost her necklace. And now, for those who haven't heard the first part, you can go back and listen to part 1, and you'll understand exactly. All of this happened when Muhammad's wife, Aisha, his youngest wife, lost her necklace in the desert, got left behind in a caravan, right. And today, everything that you have can eventually be traced back to that incident.
Right.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.